Wolves of the sea, the cool, misty landscape of the Great Bear Rainforest, can be found along the coast of British Columbia, Canada, and its nearby islands from Vancouver Island to the Alaskan border. Within this protected area, wolves roam the forests, islands, beaches. When biologist Chris Darremont began to study these wolves, he wanted to confer with local First Nations groups, as Aboriginal Canadians are known, in order to learn what they knew about these wolves. He spoke with Chester Starr, an elder at the Haltsuk Nation that had occupied the Great Bear Rainforest for thousands of years. What Starr had to say about the wolves changed Darremont's perception of the animals. Okay, so we're getting an introduction to what's going on. There's a study of wolves in the Western Canada, and the researcher Darremont is consulting with the local tribes, particular Starr, who says something that changes his research. Okay, so we have the scene setting and kind of the main claim here. Somehow the research is going to change. Starr asked Darremont which wolves he and his team were going to study, the timber wolves, mainland wolves, or the coastal wolves on the islands. The question took Darremont by surprise. Biologists had always believed that the wolves that are sometimes spotted swimming between the islands and eating salmon are the same wolves that live on the mainland. Darremont was intrigued by Starr's classification of the wolves as two different groups. At first, he was hesitant to accept the idea. The distance between the mainland and the islands was less than a mile. Why would the wolves on the island be any different? His research team nonetheless studied the wolves on the islands and in the nearby densely forests for 10 years. So Darremont changed his study. The elder at the nation, Starr, told him there were two kinds of wolves. He had no idea. So he changed his study as a result to study both the island wolves and the mainland wolves. Okay, that's the idea of paragraph 2. Paragraph 3. Throughout the study, Darremont recorded several observable differences between the sea wolves. Okay, we can see from the structure, he observed observable differences, and 4, the sea wolves displayed not only physical differences, but genetic variations as well. So we can kind of see the outline of the structure of this story. So let's read paragraph 3. Compare with the mainland wolves, the sea wolves are smaller, they're stronger swimmers, they can be spotted in the water 8 miles from any other land formation. The mainland wolves, on the other hand, eat meat such as deer and elk exclusively, whereas the sea wolves get as much as 90% of their nutrition from the sea. Some salmon-eating wolves come and go from the islands, but the sea wolves are full-time island residents. Diamond suspects. So that's not certain. He's suspecting that. Okay. So 4 says, well, okay, not only their behavioral differences, but their genetic differences. After collecting and analyzing DNA, the researchers could produce hard biological evidence that were markers that showed they were distinct types of species. The markers were used to identify individuals and species as passed down. Darremont hypothesized the chain and habit led to eventual genetic differences that sea and land wolves maintained. So many years ago, the habit of the food sources, this is the hypothesis of Darren, as a result of noting there were genetic differences shown by the DNA. So some of the sea wolves may have been forced out to the islands. There, they learned to eat everything from kelp and fish and different types of diets. Wolves living on the islands and mainland wolves became more isolated and rarely mated with each other. Over time, the two types became more distinct species. Paragraph 5. It turned out that Chester Starr was right all along. It sounded totally bizarre at first, admits Darremont. There could be two versions of the species. But he now realizes, in contrast, the skepticism definitely reflected my ignorance of indigenous knowledge at the time. Learning to trust the wisdom of the Haltsuk people opened Darremont to knowledge accumulated over millennia and positioned him so that he could gather new scientific evidence. Okay. So, nonfiction passage, we're introduced to the study of wolves in the Canadian West. Starr, this indigenous tribe member, told Darremont there were two species, which surprised him. So Darremont changed his study, and over 10 years he observed noticeable differences between the two wolves, and he tested the DNA and found out they were actually different species, and admitted at the end he was wrong. This is a third-person, informative, nonfiction essay. Relatively neutral, as most informative essays are. I think we're ready to answer the questions.